You know, our old friend Patrick Buchanan talks about the disincentives in his book, Suicide of a Superpower, and none other than Patrick J. Buchanan is standing by now, ready to chit-chat with us on not only the book, but the way Ron Paul is being treated. Pat Buchanan, welcome back to the Jason Lewis Show.
Hey, Jason, how you doing? Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Merry Christmas, Patrick. And once again, speaking of Christmas gifts, a great idea would be Suicide of a Superpower, your book that touches on what our friend from South Bend, Indiana was talking about, and that is these crazy disincentives we have economically today.
Listen, I just heard you say they get $900 a week for unemployment in Massachusetts.
At the top workers, yeah.
Well, listen, why don't I get on that shuttle to Boston?
I wonder if maybe Mitt could help you out with that. I don't know.
Listen, I used to make $93 a week in the St. Louis Globe Democrat writing editorials.
Oh, my goodness. Well, these Republicans are just crack me up. I mean, now the Senate Republicans basically sell out the House Republicans, but the president's running around demonizing the GOP, and Mitt Romney says, oh, yeah, I'm going to deport your uncle. Now, there's a campaign slogan for you.
That's right. Get rid of they got the whole family up there in Boston, don't they?
Let's talk about the book real quickly. Then I want to get your reaction to what's happening to Mr. Paul, because I had predicted it, and I think you had too as well. But Suicide of a Superpower really is talking about these things. This is a payroll tax holiday. I'm all for cutting payroll taxes, but so much for the deficit, I guess.
Well, you know, if you're talking economics, it's undoubted. You mentioned the $900 a week. You know, when I was growing up, there were no such things as food stamps in D.C. At all. And now I just noticed when I was writing my book that there are 47 million people getting them at cost of $77 billion. And that started in the mid-1960s. And you got one program after another, after another, after another. We're now up to spending 24% of GDP by the federal government. You know, Jason, Republicans are given a hard time for calling Obama a socialist. Back in 1932, Cactus Jack Gardner, running for the vice presidential position on FDR's ticket, says Hoover has led us down the road to socialism. He'd raise federal spending from 3% of GDP to 4%.
And now we're spending 25%.
Doing now, and it is almost irreversible. And I think the drive by the Democrats to make sure all this gets paid for and more of these programs get voted, I think you're headed toward a position where the United States is going to cease to be the world's last superpower, and we're headed right down the road behind Italy.
And that's why your book, Suicide of a Superpower, makes such a great little Christmas gift. So folks, run out and buy it. But you're absolutely right. What we've got is this self-fulfilling prophecy, has more of these state programs crowd out private philanthropy. Then you get to a tipping point where everybody's in the wagon. You mentioned in the 1930s, if you were homeless in Chicago in 1933, there were 600 YMCAs, 90 Salvation Army barracks, and 75 Goodwill Industry dormitories. There aren't those anymore because we've got Sugar Daddy, we've got Washington.
Sure. And, I mean, you take a look at what's happening in terms of the destruction of the family. A lot of families, most families stayed together during the Depression. They went through very tough times. The African-American community probably was even tougher. White unemployment was 25%. I think some of the African-American folks were living in barter economy. But I will say, they stayed together, and Walter Williams talked about how the illegitimacy rate was less than 10%, I think 8% in the African-American community in 1948. It's now 71%, 51% in the Hispanic community.
Well, remember Moynihan's. You bet. Remember Moynihan's warning in the early Moynihan's warning in the early 1960s about illegitimacy. What he feared for the black community has now come to pass for white Americans.
Sure, the white community now has a higher illegitimacy rate than the black community did when he wrote that controversial report on the family and caught hell for it. But now the whole country's it's 41%. And how do these kids going into school, how do they get the productive and academic skills and talents? And when they got nothing going for them at home or sitting in front of a television, they may have a teenage mom, and they show up at school really with no acclamation whatsoever to education, and we see the consequences in the public in test scores. The United States is falling toward third world status.
One of the themes in your book, Suicide of a Superpower, is that while we are busy with nation building abroad, we are being hollowed out at home, culturally, economically. And you don't have to be, we don't have to get into free trade. You and I have done that before, but everything you say in the book is as spot on, because in part, ironically enough, because we're trying to save the globe. And I got a kick out of this, and you can appreciate this given your history in New Hampshire in 1996. Big victory there. But while Rich Lowry and Dorothy Rabinowitz and the usual suspects are going after Ron Paul's foreign policy as a threat to the GOP everywhere, let's see, we had explosions rocking Baghdad last night, putting the government in jeopardy, quite frankly. And, the United States, and we all love America, but the United States actually admits, well, maybe the Pakistanis were right about this friendly fire incident where we were sending the drones in and killing things. This they're going to do to Ron Paul, whether you like Paul or not. They're going to do to Ron Paul what they did to Pat Buchanan. There is a ruling oligarchy within the GOP that is starting to look a little frightening.
Well, I think that's exactly, and they've already started it. And, Dorothy Rabinowitz says, what a dangerous foreign policy he's got. Will somebody tell me what does it profit the United States if we save Anbar Province and lose Arizona?
Exactly.
For heaven's sakes. Look, we put in 9 years in that war in Iraq, and we leave there, and the president says the vice president's a terrorist, and he's been trying to assassinate people, and he flees to Kurdistan, and then the deputy prime minister, they got him an arrest warrant out for him, and he got 16 bombs go off in Baghdad, 3 or 4 days after the Americans leave.
Right.
What was it all for?
Well, and indeed, what is it all for? There is this Wilsonian obsession from, and let's include some evangelicals in Iowa. There is this Wilsonian obsession within the GOP, and they're fast becoming the war party, about going abroad in the Middle East especially, and sooner or later, people are going to have to realize this is a fool's errand. And one guy brings it up, and he is torpedoed for it.
The truth is, 2/3 of the American people now believe the Iraq war was a mistake for this country. They appreciate what the troops did. The troops fought well. They fought hard. They didn't lose a battle. But they've come home, and 2/3 of the American people think it was a mistake. Ron Paul was the only guy up on that stage that said no to that war. He's the only guy up there that said, look, there's no child left behind. I don't think it's going to work, and I don't think the feds belong in this. Now, everybody agrees it's not working. He said no to that, the Medicare Part D, everybody gets free prescription drugs once they hit 65. He said, we got to pay for these things, so I'm against it.
Pat, I'm up against a hard break here.
And it proves he was right.
Pat Buchanan, I know you got to run. Thanks so much. Good point, all, and thanks for checking in once again.